The sun hovered low over the New Mexico plains, casting a golden hue across the dust and fences of the Calloway ranch. The air was still, save for a warm breeze whispering through the wooden posts. Maeve Calloway walked alone through the open corral, her boots crunching softly on the packed dirt. Dressed in a light cream-colored dress that swayed gently around her legs, her long blonde braid rested over her shoulder. There was something unusual in the air that morning. A stillness. A pause before something changed. Across the enclosure, the sound of hooves disrupted the silence. Not hurried. Deliberate. Emerging from the far end of the pen came the dark stallion. His coat like shadow, his presence like thunder just beyond the hills. No one had been able to break him. No one had even gotten close. They called him Midnight. Maeve had watched from a distance for weeks as the wranglers failed, one after the other. But she never tried, until now. She didn't speak. She didn't move fast. Maeve simply stood at the center of the corral, hands at her sides, her eyes calm. The stallion came closer, step by step, snorting softly, his muscles twitching beneath his sleek coat. His dark eyes locked with hers, intense and unreadable. She didn't see danger in them. She saw pain, loss, something familiar. Maeve reached out slowly, not to grab, not to command, but to offer. The stallion stopped. A moment passed. Then he lowered his head, just slightly. Her breath caught in her throat. A small gesture, almost nothing, but to Maeve it felt like an entire conversation. Her hand met his muzzle gently. Warm, real, unshaken. A storm of emotion rose inside her. Memories of her father, Elias Vornhart, who had once whispered that true trust couldn't be forced, only earned. From the fence, Harlan Creed watched, arms folded tightly across his chest. The old ranch hand had seen plenty in his years, but this was different. "He's never done that before," he murmured. Beside him, Boone Reddick nodded, eyes narrowed beneath his dusty hat. "That horse don't bow to no one," he said. "Except her, it seems." But Maeve didn't hear them. She was somewhere else, connected to something older, deeper, maybe even forgotten. Then, just as the moment settled, the sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed from the front gate. A truck pulled in. Maeve turned her head slightly but didn't let go of the stallion. Somehow, she knew that what had just begun between them wasn't random. And whatever had arrived at that gate, it was tied to this. To him. To her. And to a truth buried so far beneath the surface, it would take more than courage to face it. It would take unraveling the past, one broken piece at a time. The truck's engine rumbled low as it came to a stop near the front porch of the house. Maeve stood still in the corral, her hand still resting gently on Midnight's muzzle. His ears flicked toward the sound, his body tense but unmoving. She could feel it. Something was wrong. Not dangerous, not yet, but unsettling. Boone Reddick walked past her, muttering, "I'll see who it is," and headed toward the house, his boots stirring dry dust into the morning air. Maeve didn't follow. Her gut told her to stay with the horse. The door of the truck creaked open, and out stepped a man she hadn't seen in over 15 years, Caleb Thorne. His presence hit her like a forgotten melody. Tall, lean, with the same sharp blue eyes and worn-out leather jacket he used to wear when they were kids. Except now, there was something colder in him, something quiet and hardened. Caleb had once been her closest friend. Then one day, he vanished without a word. And now, he was back, unannounced, uninvited, and carrying something more than old memories. Maeve walked slowly toward the fence as Caleb approached. "Didn't expect to find you out here," he said, his voice steady but without warmth. "Didn't expect you to come back," she replied. Silence stretched between them like barbed wire. Caleb looked past her to the stallion. "That the one they're calling Midnight?" he asked. Maeve nodded. "He's not what people think." Caleb raised an eyebrow. Neither am I. She didn't respond. Too much history sat between them to unpack in a single sentence. Inside the house, Harlan Creed was on the phone with Rowan Blackwell, the town's veterinarian and longtime friend of the Calloway family. "You're gonna want to come by," Harlan said. "Maeve's finally made contact with that black devil. And there's another thing. Caleb Thorne just rolled back into town." There was a pause on the other end. "That boy's return ain't a coincidence," Rowan finally muttered. "Especially not now." Harlan agreed, though he didn't say it aloud. Something was shifting, and the timing felt too precise to ignore. Back at the corral, Midnight began to pace slowly, circling Maeve like he was reading her mood. Caleb leaned against the fence, arms crossed. "You know," he said, "your dad once told me that horses can see straight through a man's soul. Said they know who's carrying secrets." Maeve turned her eyes toward him, sharp and unwavering. "Did he also say what they do when they find out the truth?" Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he looked away, jaw tightening. That one question had hit too close to the bone. As the sun climbed higher, the wind picked up slightly, brushing dust across the wooden beams. Maeve watched Caleb for another moment before turning back to Midnight. Something inside her warned this wasn't just about the horse. Caleb's return meant something. A chapter from her past was opening again, whether she was ready for it or not. And she could feel it deep in her chest. The truth was no longer buried. It was rising, slowly, and it was coming straight for her. That evening, the air turned cooler, the desert winds brushing through the dying light like whispers from another time. Maeve sat alone on the back porch, a mug of black coffee growing cold in her hands. Inside the house, the floorboards creaked beneath Harlan Creed's heavy steps, but he knew better than to interrupt her when she fell into that quiet. Her eyes weren't on the horizon, they were on the past. Caleb Thorne's sudden reappearance had torn something loose inside her. Not anger, not sorrow, just questions that had waited too long for answers. She remembered the last time she saw him. They were both 17, sitting on the fence just beyond the barn, dreaming of escape. Caleb had always talked big, about getting out of town, building a life away from the weight of family names and buried secrets. Then, one day, he disappeared. No call, no letter, not even a goodbye. Maeve had waited, even hoped. But eventually, she learned to bury that chapter, just like so many others. Until now. Inside, Rowan Blackwell had arrived, kneeling beside Midnight in the open stall, carefully examining the stallion's hooves. Boone Reddick stood nearby, arms crossed, watching them both. "Physically, he's sound," Rowan muttered, running a hand along the horse's flank. "But he's not just a runaway. Someone worked this horse. Someone trained him hard, and not with kindness." Boone frowned. "You think he was stolen?" Rowan nodded slowly. "Or escaped something worse?" They both looked toward the porch, where Maeve sat in silence. She brought him in. Maybe he'll lead her to something else. Maeve's thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the screen door. Caleb stepped out, holding a small box in his hands. "I found this in my truck. Thought it belonged to your dad." She looked at the weathered wood of the box, small, hand-carved, with a familiar sunburst symbol etched on top. Her breath caught. That was her father's mark. Elias Vornhart used to carve that into every saddle, every tool he made. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice low. Caleb hesitated. "It was left for me. A long time ago." She opened the box slowly. Inside, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth, was a tarnished silver pendant. It was shaped like a feather, delicate but unmistakable. Elias had worn it every day. "Why would my father leave this with you?" Maeve asked. Caleb looked down, jaw clenched. "Because there's something he didn't tell you. Something he asked me to keep safe, until the right time." Maeve's heart pounded in her chest. Everything about her father had always felt like a steady truth, until now. From the barn, Midnight let out a sharp snort, hooves scraping against the stall floor. The sound snapped the silence. Caleb met Maeve's eyes, the same way he had when they were kids, half defiant, half broken. "He was protecting you," Caleb said. But he also knew, secrets don't stay buried forever. Maeve didn't reply. She only gripped the pendant tighter, staring down at the symbol her father once carved with love. The past wasn't done with her. And neither was Caleb. Morning broke with a pale light stretching across the valley, casting long shadows through the open barn doors. Maeve stood in front of Midnight's stall, the silver feather pendant resting against her chest. She hadn't slept. Her fingers brushed the edges of the charm again and again, as if it could unlock something. Some hidden message from her father, Elias Vornhart. Midnight paced slowly behind the wooden bars, restless. She wasn't sure if he was responding to her unease or if he felt something deeper still stirring in the air. Caleb hadn't said much after handing her the box. Just that Elias had left it in his care before disappearing from town on what was supposed to be a routine trip. He never came back. The accident that claimed his life was filed away quickly, quietly, with no real investigation. Everyone said it was a truck rollover on the canyon road. But now, with that box, that pendant, and Caleb's haunted expression, it didn't feel like an accident anymore. It felt like a cover. Inside the kitchen, Harlan Creed flipped through an old leather-bound ledger Elias used to keep. He was tracking someone, Harlan muttered to himself, tapping a faded page. Maeve entered the room just as he spoke. "What do you mean?" she asked. Harlan turned the book toward her. There were names, dates, and brief notes written in Elias's neat, deliberate hand. One name stood out more than the others, Sable Marin. Next to it, a single phrase, "Do not trust." Maeve had never heard the name before, but the warning chilled her. Caleb entered behind her, hearing the name. "Sable Marin," he repeated. "That's who your father asked me to watch." Maeve turned to him, disbelief on her face. "And you never told me?" Caleb shook his head. "He made me promise. Said it was too dangerous for you to be involved. That he was getting close to something." Harlan crossed his arms, brow furrowed. "Whatever it was, your father knew it had weight. People like Elias don't write down warnings unless they mean it." The room grew quiet. The silence of a storm not yet arrived. Maeve felt the ground shift beneath her, not literally, but emotionally. Every piece of her father she thought she understood was now full of shadows. "Then we need to find her," she said, voice firm. "Sable Marin. If she's connected to what happened to him. I want answers." Caleb hesitated. "She doesn't exactly want to be found. She vanished right after your dad died. Went off the grid." Maeve looked at him sharply. "Then we start with the people who knew her. Someone must know where she went." Outside, the wind began to howl through the canyon like a warning. From the barn, Midnight whinnied sharply, stomping his hooves. Maeve looked out the window, eyes narrowing. Something about the way the horse reacted told her this wasn't just about uncovering a hidden past. It was about confronting it, head-on, whether she was ready or not. Caleb met her gaze, quietly. "If we go down this road, there's no turning back." Maeve nodded. "Good. I don't plan to." Dust trailed behind the truck as it rolled down the old service road, the tires crunching over gravel and bone-dry earth. Maeve sat in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the terrain like it might offer up ghosts. Caleb kept both hands on the wheel, his jaw tense. The address they were headed to wasn't listed on any modern map. It was something Elias had scribbled years ago in the margins of a faded envelope, one Maeve found hidden beneath a false drawer in his old desk. The only words written beneath it, Marin, last known. They arrived at the remains of what had once been a small, roadside motel. Now, it stood broken by time and sun, its sign barely legible, roof sagging, windows long shattered. Maeve stepped out of the truck cautiously, her boots sinking slightly into the sand. The wind carried the faint scent of creosote and rust. "You really think she lived here?" Caleb asked, scanning the empty buildings. "Not lived," Maeve replied. "Hid." She pushed open the door of the main office. Hinges groaned in protest. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. They searched for an hour. Dust-covered drawers, moldy file cabinets, rotted floorboards. Nothing but traces of what once was. Then, in the bottom of a locked drawer, Maeve found a photograph. Old. Faded. A woman with short dark hair, standing beside Elias. They weren't smiling, but they were close, too close. On the back of the photo, in Elias's handwriting, Sable, 1988. Maeve stared at it for a long time, her thoughts tangled. Caleb looked over her shoulder. "He never told you about her?" She shook her head. "Not once." Back at the truck, Caleb leaned against the hood, arms crossed. "You know what this means, right?" Maeve nodded slowly. There was something between them. Something serious. And if he warned me not to trust her, maybe it ended badly. Caleb studied her. Or maybe he was protecting her from something else. We don't know the full picture yet. Maeve hated that he was right. Every answer brought two new questions. Why had her father hidden this part of his life from her? And what had really happened in 1988 that he was still trying to protect her from? As the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, shadows stretched long over the ruins. Maeve held the photo in her lap as Caleb started the truck. They drove in silence, the radio off, only the sound of tires on rock filling the space between them. Maeve stared out the window, her mind replaying every word her father ever said to her, wondering which ones were true and which were carefully chosen lies. She glanced down at the photo again, at Sable's eyes. There was something in them. Something guarded. Something broken. Back at the ranch, Boone Reddick stood near the barn, arms crossed, watching the horizon. Midnight paced in his stall again, restless, agitated. Boone narrowed his eyes. "That horse knows something," he muttered. Inside, Harlan Creed sat at the table, turning pages in Elias's ledger when he froze. A name jumped off the paper, one he hadn't seen before. Rowan Blackwell. And next to it, a date that hadn't arrived yet. The kitchen light flickered as Harlan Creed leaned in closer to the ledger, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers. The name stared back at him, Rowan Blackwell, written in Elias Vornhart's unmistakable script. But what made Harlan's breath catch wasn't the name itself, it was the date beside it. It was tomorrow. Elias had died over a decade ago. There was no way he could have written that date unless he knew something the rest of them didn't. Unless he had planned for this long before the pieces started moving. Back at the barn, Boone Reddick watched Midnight with a wary eye. The stallion was behaving strangely, moving in short, agitated bursts, snorting, pawing at the dirt like he sensed something Maeve and Caleb couldn't. Boone muttered, "That horse is feelin' something comin'. Storm's not on the radar, but somethin's stirrin'." He walked slowly up to the edge of the stall, resting his weathered hands on the wood. Midnight paused, ears twitching, then stared directly at him. It wasn't fear. It was warning. Maeve and Caleb returned just after sundown, their truck headlights sweeping across the open land like searchlights. She stepped out, photo still in hand, her face pale from the revelations at the old motel. Harlan met her at the steps, holding the ledger. "You're gonna want to see this," he said. Maeve's brows furrowed as she scanned the page. "Rowan Blackwell?" she whispered. Caleb leaned in, frowning. "He's the vet. Why would Elias write his name with a future date?" Harlan looked to Maeve. "Because whatever this is, your father thought it would happen tomorrow." The three of them sat at the kitchen table, the weight of Elias's foresight hanging thick in the air. Maeve remembered Rowan Blackwell always being kind, quiet, helpful with the animals, but never close to her father. At least, that's what she thought. "We need to talk to him," she said firmly. Caleb hesitated. "We show up accusing him of something based on a date in a dusty old book? He'll shut down or worse, cover something up." Maeve shook her head. "We don't accuse. We ask. And we watch." That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood outside the barn under a sky littered with stars, the cold air biting at her skin. Midnight had calmed, but his eyes still watched her closely, as if he knew she was about to cross a threshold she couldn't return from. Maeve ran a hand along his mane. "What did he know, boy? What was my father preparing me for?" Midnight nudged her shoulder gently, and for a split second she felt like Elias was right there with her, guiding her through the dark. As dawn crept in, casting light across the dry fields, Maeve stood with Caleb at the truck, ready to drive to Rowan Blackwell's clinic. She looked back at the ranch one last time, a strange heaviness pressing in her chest. Whatever happened next, this wasn't just about Elias anymore. It was about everything he'd left behind. And if Rowan had answers, they were about to uncover a truth her father had hidden in plain sight, timed perfectly to explode. Rowan Blackwell's clinic sat at the edge of town, tucked beneath a cluster of cottonwoods, its faded green shutters flapping in the breeze. Maeve had passed it 100 times before without a second thought, but now, with the weight of Elias's ledger in her lap, every chipped brick and creaking window seemed suspicious. Caleb parked the truck and killed the engine. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "You ready for this?" he asked. Maeve nodded, though her throat tightened. "I have to be." They entered the clinic to the soft scent of antiseptic and hay. The waiting room was empty except for a sleepy bloodhound curled up in the corner. Rowan appeared from a back room, wiping his hands on a rag, his white coat smeared with dust and horsehair. He smiled in that usual polite way, but Maeve could see something flicker in his eyes when he saw her and Caleb together. "Maeve." "Caleb." "This is a surprise," he said, though his tone didn't sound surprised at all. "We found your name in my father's ledger," Maeve said, skipping the pleasantries. She pulled the book from her bag and laid it on the counter, open to the page. "Next to tomorrow's date." Rowan stared at the entry for several seconds, then carefully closed the book. "Come with me," he said quietly, leading them into the back room and closing the door behind them. The space was small, part storage, part office, and the walls were lined with old records, shelves, and a locked cabinet in the corner. Rowan didn't sit. He paced slowly, dragging a hand through his graying hair. "Your father wasn't just a rancher, Maeve," he began. "He was involved in something bigger. Years ago, he uncovered a transport ring, illegal trading of high bloodline horses. Midnight wasn't just some wild stallion. He was bred for it." Maeve's heart skipped. "Bred? You mean he was part of it?" Rowan nodded. "But he got loose. Your father helped cover it up, tried to protect him. That's when things got dangerous." Caleb stepped forward, voice low. "And what does tomorrow have to do with you?" Rowan sighed. Elias suspected that Sable Marin was still active in the network, using legitimate buyers to move the animals. "He asked me to monitor vet records, watch for signs. A shipment's coming through tomorrow. The final piece." Midnight wasn't the only one. Maeve's eyes widened. "And you didn't tell me? You let me keep him, not knowing what they'd do to get him back." Rowan's expression darkened. "Your father made me swear to protect the truth until it was time. He believed you'd be the one to finish what he started." Silence fell over the room like a curtain. Maeve felt the floor shift beneath her, as if the truth had restructured everything she thought she knew. Midnight wasn't just a lost soul. He was a symbol of something far more dangerous. And now, with the final shipment coming, they were racing a clock Elias had started ticking years ago. Maeve's voice was steady. "Then we stop them." Rowan met her eyes. "We'll need help." Caleb nodded. "Then let's start with Boone." The sky was still dark when Boone Reddick arrived at the ranch, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn fog. Maeve stood on the porch, wrapped in her father's old coat, waiting. Boone didn't ask questions when he saw her expression. He just climbed the steps and said, "Tell me what you need." Inside, Caleb spread out a hand-drawn map of the canyon roads on the kitchen table, a trail marked in red ink. Rowan confirmed the shipments moving through here, north of Carson Ridge, just before sunrise, Caleb explained. Boone leaned in, squinting. "That's a ghost trail. No patrols. No traffic." Maeve pointed to a narrow pass marked on the map. "That's where we intercept them. It's the only stretch they can't turn off from." Boone nodded. "We'll need to block both ends. Pin 'em in." Rowan, who had arrived minutes earlier, brought out a small lockbox filled with papers. "These are vet documents Elias collected, proof of illegal transfers, breeding records, payment ledgers. If we can get them into the hands of the sheriff after the shipment is caught, this all becomes more than just a story. It becomes prosecution." Maeve felt her pulse quicken. "Then we stop being the hunted." By the time the sun peeked over the hills, the team was already in position. Boone and Caleb parked a ranch truck sideways across the road near the canyon's mouth, tires slightly deflated to keep it low and solid. Maeve stood on a rocky outcrop above, binoculars in hand. Her breath was shallow, her fingers gripping the strap of the silver pendant around her neck. This was the moment Elias had prepared her for, not just to uncover the truth, but to act on it. And now, there was no turning back. Through the early morning haze, Maeve spotted dust rising in the distance. A large black trailer was moving steadily along the dirt path, flanked by 2 SUVs. "They're coming," she whispered into the walkie. Down below, Caleb loaded around into the chamber of the old rifle Elias had left behind. "Let's make him proud," he muttered. Boone tightened his gloves and moved into position behind the rear barricade. Rowan stayed back with the evidence, ready to leave for the sheriff's office the second the operation was in motion. The moment the vehicles hit the blocked curve, everything erupted. The lead SUV slammed on the brakes, tires screeching. Boone stepped out, rifle drawn, shouting for the drivers to exit slowly. One man complied. The other bolted, fleeing into the brush, but Caleb was faster. He chased him down and tackled him hard into the gravel, pinning him until the man stopped resisting. Maeve jumped from her perch and ran toward the trailer, flinging open the doors. Inside, several horses stood trembling, branded, drugged, but alive. One of them was a young black colt with eyes identical to Midnight's. She stared at it, heart hammering. This was the last piece. The truth Elias had died to protect. Behind her, sirens began to wail in the distance. Rowan had done his part. And as the sun rose fully over the ridge, Maeve knew the past had finally collided with the present. But the reckoning wasn't over yet. Sable Marin was still out there. And now, she knew Maeve was coming. The dust had barely settled over the canyon road when the sheriff's deputies arrived. Sirens faded into the distance as the men from the transport operation were cuffed and loaded into patrol cars. Maeve stood off to the side, arms folded tightly across her chest, watching as the black colt was gently led from the trailer. The young horse stumbled, still groggy, but his eyes, those same dark, knowing eyes, met hers for a split second. It was like Midnight looking back at her, reminding her that this wasn't just about justice. It was about redemption. Inside the trailer, Harlan and Boone uncovered more crates, filled with syringes, forged vet documents, and bags of feed laced with sedatives. Rowan, who had returned just in time with the sheriff, sifted through the evidence, carefully identifying everything Elias had once suspected. "This'll be enough," the sheriff said, flipping through the documents. "But we still need the top of the ladder. Someone financed this, and someone signed off on every sale." Maeve turned to Rowan, her voice steady. "It's Sable." "I know it is." Rowan didn't argue. He just nodded solemnly. That afternoon, back at the ranch, Maeve sat in the barn with Midnight. The stallion was calmer now, almost peaceful, as if sensing the rescue of the other horses had lifted something heavy from both of them. Caleb stood nearby, flipping through the last pages of Elias's ledger, searching for anything they might have missed. Then he paused. "She's not just out there," he said quietly. "She's here. Or she was." Maeve's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Caleb turned the book around. A name. Tess Ashbourne. Next to it, alias Sable Marin. Everything inside Maeve turned cold. Tess Ashbourne had been a name in the town for years, a quiet woman who ran a remote boarding stable in the hills outside of Black Hollow. She was always polite, always distant. Maeve had spoken to her once or twice when she was a teenager, but never thought twice about her. "It was right in front of us," Maeve whispered. "The whole time." Caleb nodded. "She didn't disappear. She just changed names." Boone, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. "We go now, before word gets to her about the bust." The truck roared to life one more time as Maeve, Caleb, and Boone sped through the winding hills, the sun starting its descent behind the mesa. The road to the Ashbourne property was narrow and half-forgotten, lined with dry brush and twisted trees. As they crested the final hill, the house came into view, quiet, still, but with lights on inside. A black SUV was parked beside the barn. "She's here," Caleb said, voice low. Maeve stared at the house, her chest tightening. "This ends tonight." They stepped out slowly, weapons holstered but visible, the kind of silent warning only old ranchers and survivors know how to give. Maeve approached the front porch, her boots echoing on the wooden steps. Inside, a shadow moved past the window. Boone reached for his radio but stopped when Maeve raised a hand. "No more hiding," she said. "We do this face to face." Her fist hovered over the door for a heartbeat, then she knocked hard. The sound echoed through the hills like a thunderclap. And from inside, a woman's voice answered calmly, "I was wondering when you'd find me." The front door creaked open slowly, revealing Tess Ashbourne, or rather, Sable Marin. She stood with eerie composure, dressed in a weathered riding coat, her silver hair pulled back tightly. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and familiar. Maeve recognized them from the old photo of her father. "You've grown into him," Sable said softly. "Same fire. Same stubbornness." Maeve stepped forward, her voice like steel. "You knew my father. You lied to this town. You stole from families. And you think I won't hold you accountable?" Sable smirked. "No, I think you will. That's why I waited." Inside the house, the atmosphere was tense, sterile, but organized. Files lined the walls, horse pedigree records, auction photos, transaction logs, all meticulously kept. Caleb swept through the papers, quickly identifying names that matched the ledger. "She kept everything," he muttered, "like she knew one day it'd come to this." Sable remained unfazed. "I didn't hide," she said. "Elias knew where I was. He just didn't want to face what we both became." Maeve turned sharply. "He trusted you, and you betrayed him." Sable's eyes flickered for the first time. "He betrayed me first." Maeve narrowed her gaze. "What are you talking about?" Sable moved slowly toward a locked drawer and pulled out an envelope, yellowed, sealed, and marked with Elias's handwriting. She handed it to Maeve. "He left this for you. I never opened it." Maeve hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside was a letter. Her father's words spilled across the page, trembling but deliberate. He confessed everything. His involvement in the early days of the transport ring, how he helped Sable build it before realizing the cost, and how trying to destroy it from within had cost him his life. "I thought I could fix it," the letter read. "But I left it for you, Maeve, because I knew you'd be stronger than me." Tears welled in Maeve's eyes, not just from the pain of truth, but from the weight of legacy. Caleb rested a hand on her shoulder. Boone stood by the door, his face unreadable. Sable took a seat calmly at the table. "You have everything you need," she said. "The files, the horses, the connections. You can take it to the law. But the story will stain your father's name too." Maeve looked at her, resolute. "Then let it. The truth matters more than a clean name." She turned to Caleb. "Call the sheriff." 20 minutes later, Sable was escorted away in handcuffs, her expression unreadable. As the cruisers pulled off into the fading light, Maeve stood in the driveway, watching until the dust settled. The silence that followed felt different, cleaner. Back at the ranch, she returned to Midnight's stall. The stallion stepped forward slowly, nuzzling her hand as if sensing that the storm had passed. Maeve whispered, "It's over. We're free." Midnight let out a soft breath and lowered his head. That night, under a sky full of stars, Maeve read her father's letter again by lantern light. The wind was quiet, the horses rested, and the future, though uncertain, no longer frightened her. Elias Vornhart's legacy was not just in the land or the bloodlines, but in the choice his daughter made to break the cycle. And as the flame from the lantern flickered gently, Maeve closed her eyes and knew healing had finally begun.